these are 5 pillars. 5 pillars that demonstrate that in fact it is possible. It is possible for the liberal left and the religious right to be united. So who wants to start with which number? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hear a number 4. Okay, number 4 it is. So here is the first story that gives us some evidence that things are changing. This topic, number 4, is separation of church and state. Usually quite a divisive issue in our country. So you remember there was a cross-shaped steel beam found in the rubble of 9/11? You'll remember that there have been those who have argued that it should not be placed on that site. But something interesting just happened. A leading advocate of church-state separation, the Anti-Defamation League, has issued a statement supporting the installation of the cross at the memorial. And this is their statement. Allowing this cross to be included in the memorial along with other artifacts found at the site does not constitute government endorsement of a religious message. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that these beams, part of the infrastructure of one of the towers, acquired historical significance and gives comfort to many who have lost loved ones in the attack, as well as those who spent days and weeks sifting through the ash and debris. This is the first piece of evidence for change in what is normally seen as a very divisive topic. What's the next one? 5, 3, 2, 1. We hear a number 1. Number 1. Immigration. Immigration. The conservatives for the comprehensive immigration reform have come out in droves to support the Uniting Americans Family Act. Bless you. This included the National Association of Evangelicals, the Southern Baptist Convention, and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. There is disagreement in the particular line about whether or not LGBT families can have the federal rights of immigration. But outside of that particular issue, it's actually the conservative religious base that's putting on an incredible amount of pressure to create immigration reform and human rights reform in this legislation. Michael Gerson, who was George Bush's Jr.'s chief speechwriter, said there has been a significant shift among the evangelical leaders who view immigration reform as an important issue to their Christian witness. So, for instance, we are aware that 70% of Hispanics in the U.S. are Roman Catholic, and Hispanic evangelicals and Pentecostals are among the nation's fastest growing religious groups. And so, Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, said, if you are a devout follower of Christ, you have to support immigration reform. So on immigration reform, there seems to be unity among both conservative and religious groups. What's the next number? Number 2. Number 2. Stem cell research. This has been a really divisive topic, hasn't it? Robbie George, who served on Bush's Stem Cell Council research, has partnered with us and did a chapter in our book that's coming out December 6th called Whose God Rules. Tony Blair did the foreword. Robbie George, who is an incredibly conservative man. I just received a liberal email blast that completely vilified him for all kinds of topics. But on the issue of stem cell research, what he says in our book is quite interesting, which suggests to me that there's some change. The change that's occurring is a result of the scientific advances in stem cell research. It is now possible to take skin cells, hair follicles, and actually use that to create stem cells. And he argues two things. One, you don't actually need to use embryonic stem cells. We actually have another way to achieve the same scientific advances. And the second argument is that religious conservatives should stop using theological rationale for their position. They should actually be more grounded in science and let that determine the policy. This, to me, is evidence of a dramatic shift. What's the next number? Huh? Number 5. The number 5. This is about LGBT rights. So I'm going to give a few examples of why I think there's some movement in this topic. Last year's the Salt Lake City Council in Utah unanimously granted housing and employment rights to lesbian, bisexual, gay, and transgender people. This vote got a historic endorsement from the Mormon Church. According to Michael Otterson, Director of Public Affairs for the LDS Church, he said, "The Church supports these ordinances because they are fair and reasonable." Just a couple weeks ago, there were a series of vigils held for a few people who experienced hate crimes. They were beaten. They were just completely violated in these moments. And what's incredible is in Salt Lake, this vigil had many different religious groups witnessing for this tragedy. And they included American Baptist, Roman Catholic, United Church of Christ, Unitarian Universalists, Buddhists, Humanists, Pagans. And what's amazing is that how many LDS persons of faith spoke out in support of LGBT rights. For instance, one woman who is the sister of the gay man who was brutally beaten said, "I am LDS, my family is LDS, and as you know, it doesn't matter. He is my brother, we love him. It's intolerable to treat someone as less than precious and valued." Another church leader spoke up and said, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is no other commandment greater than this." In New York, we saw that a Republican-led legislature endorsed marriage equality. In North Carolina, they are scheduled to now vote on a public referendum that would define marriage between one man and one woman. But here's what the polls say. 55% of those in North Carolina said that they would not vote for this amendment, and only 37% actually favor it. Here in Pennsylvania, as they call us, an amazing new poll just came out by Franklin Marshall College. Exactly 50% of Pennsylvanians either strongly or somewhat support a constitutional amendment to allow same-sex marriage. If you ask about civil unions, it's 62%. Do we have another number? 3. Number 3. Richard Cizik, who was the vice president of the National Evangelical Association, has been leading a movement called Creation Care, where he has been using biblical stories and teachings in order to unite conservative evangelicals with environmentalists to stop global warming. Okay, so now that I've told you my stories, here's the deal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Consider this a spectrum. The most conservative, 1. That is 1, right? Yeah. The most liberal, 5. If you are a 5, and you consider yourself a liberal fundamentalist, you will never be able to speak to a 1, a fundamentalist conservative. But if you are a 1, you can talk to a 3. Because the worldviews are not so diverse. There are some things you can speak about and some things you don't, and you just play the game. So the 1s and the 3s talk. The 2s and the 4s talk with one another. The 3s and the 5s converse. And certainly the 5s and the 4s, they have this whole, cohorts to make this a socialist country, right? But here's the deal. Here's the deal. It is 2011. We are not engaged in the politics of the 80s and the 90s, or even of the last decade. Things are changing, and we ourselves must be open to hear that change, to listen for that change. Because the thing is, on all of these issues, in the past, they have been incredibly divisive. They have been tearing apart families and counties and states and our country. The reds and the blues aren't as divided as we once thought. I think we're becoming a more purple nation, where we're learning to actually converse about hot-button topics in new ways. And that's my challenge for you. Be a bridge builder. And that starts by knowing yourself. If you know yourself to be a 5, then listen to the 3s. If you know yourself to be a 2, dare to have a conversation with a 4, even when they are at your own dinner table. With families, with political officials, we have the responsibility to bring good form to our democracy, and I think now is the time when it is possible across all kinds of historically divisive topics for the liberal left and the religious right to be truly united. May it be so. Thanks. So I have a job next week.